Hello, everyone. This is Des, and you are listening to the Wellness Project powered by Spotlight Coalition. Today's episode is a very interesting one. I speak with Erika about her upbringing in a chaotic household. Now, she says she felt very loved by her parents, but their dynamic and their relationship issues really affected her and her mental health. So I think this is such an interesting thing that we need to speak about because parents and their relationships do affect their children and their mental health and just their whole family system. This is going to be a really great conversation, so let's speak with Erika. Everyone, I am here with Erika Worth. Erika, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, Des, thank you for having me. I am excited to dive into all things mental health with you.
I am as well. So, for our listeners, can you start out by giving us an introduction to who you are, the kinds of things that you've been through with your mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my mental health journey began, I like to say now, as I've come to understand trauma and where it really starts. And for many of us, it's in the womb, even. I think throughout my whole life, I've always been sensitive and I've always been really emotionally in tuned with my surroundings. And you could say empathic in the sense that I could also really sense other people's energies and emotions and absorbed it all growing up. And as a kid, that can be a pretty heavy burden, depending on like the environments you find yourself in. And if it is one with a lot of energetic chaos, then it can be easy to absorb that. And for myself, I grew up in a home where I was loved by both of my parents, but it was highly dysfunctional. And at the age of 14, my way of coping with that, because at that age, oftentimes we become, and I'll just speak for myself as a girl, I became a lot more aware of the situation that was going on in my home and the tension. And it had always been there. I mean, come to find out now as an adult and as I've done kind of talked to my parents and gone back, I'm like, oh, it was there since I was born. There was already dysfunction, but I really started to notice it at age 14. And it felt just really scary. There was like this constant threat of our family breaking up. In the environment I grew up in, we were homeschooled. We were in a really conservative bubble community-wise. And that was very taboo. The idea that my parents might divorce or our family would dissolve as it was, as I knew it, was terrifying. And so my way of coping with that was really to control whatever I thought I could. And one of those things was my food, my eating, and exercise and physical fitness, both of which I had always been really interested in from just like a fun, creative expression perspective. When it comes to food, I loved cooking as a really little kid and making my own recipes and that sort of thing. And same thing with physical fitness. I was always such an active child and loved to use my body. It was calming to me. It was therapeutic. But in this kind of chaotic time, those were the two things that I thought, okay, I can control something here. That's when it first started to take a turn that was more dysfunctional rather than just a creative outlet for self-expression. 3 months into this, it was in the summer, and 3 months into that, my mom started to notice signs and symptoms that something was off. If you're someone listening and you've experienced disordered eating in any way, it can be hard to see it for yourself the way other people see it. Sometimes there's body dysmorphia going on and things like that. And so what was becoming very obvious to everyone around me, I couldn't see. But my mom finally took me in to see a therapist, a nutritionist, went to my doctor, kind of put me on this plan to get me, in quotation marks, well. But I think one of the things that is really challenging with this that I now know when it comes to healing and just all the layers that there are to it is, unless you're going to take me out of my home and put me somewhere where there's not constant chaos, or you're going to give the parents resources to work on their own relationship, that's causing a lot of this turmoil. They were taking away my only lifeline. They were suggesting that I completely overhaul my disordered relationship with food and exercise, but not changing the stressful environment I had to live in every day and not really giving me tools to cope either, which was really interesting. even though I was in therapy at a really young age, I never learned breathing techniques. I never learned grounding techniques or really any self-regulation strategies. Maybe I would get a questionnaire here and there to do, but I really don't remember feeling very resourced when I would leave. I would just wonder what was wrong with me. Like, why am I doing this when none of my friends have to go to counseling and none of my friends are seeing a nutritionist? So I also felt a lot of shame because my life just seemed really different and really other from my peers. At that age, connecting and having friends and feeling like you fit in is everything. So that was really challenging. Fast forward into my adult years, I did get, the really concerning symptoms under control to the degree that like I could function like as an adult. But when I moved away from home and moved to Portland, Oregon, where I live now, to go to graduate school, that's when I really started to realize that there were a lot of layers I never addressed, and that deeper beneath those symptoms were a lot of things, whether that was trauma I needed to work through, things like that, that were a bigger factor in the eating disorder than just I was afraid of food, which is like what I was told by my counselor. You're afraid of food and you just need to get over your fears of food. It's like, I think it's more than that. And I don't actually think I'm afraid of food. I think there's something more going on. So as an adult and like finally removed from my home environment that I grew up in, I was able to dive deeper, and it felt safer to finally go there to those deeper layers. And that's when I really started to notice the bigger transformation. I will say in my young adult years, especially when I first moved away from home, there was a lot of anxiety on board, kind of as a surface level thing. But I honestly think that served to protect me for a while and in childhood from deeper emotions that I had no container for, like anger and rage, which is really interesting when you finally like feel that for the first time in your adult life. It's kind of wild. You're like, oh my goodness, like this is really wild. So I think just giving myself permission to finally, in a safe container with more resources around me, explore those emotions, past stories and traumas that I didn't feel safe to until I had the support system around me. I know it's a long answer to your question, but that's been my journey with mental health. And I'm passionate now about helping resource people with the same sort of things that really made a difference for me and helping them dig beneath the layers of just the symptoms. And oftentimes we just think, oh, I'm just sad all the time, or I just can't sleep, or I just can't, this is just who I am. Instead of really realizing it's actually a message from your body asking you, like, oh, there's something here I want you to look at. Like, that's at the root of this. Like, can we heal this? And it's not as much about the symptoms, is what I've learned from my experience, and help other people to explore.
I'm so glad that you shared all of that. I think your story is one that's really important because, as you said, you were really loved by your parents, but you grew up in this kind of chaotic household. And something I really like that you brought up is that, you're in this therapy working on your disordered eating, but you're still in your same environment. So it is so important, your environment, especially as a teen, kids and teens really need that stability and to feel safe and to have that structure in their home. Not only that feeling of, feeling loved by your parents. That's not the whole picture, right? That's not the whole piece to the puzzle. So that's really important that you bring that up. And, something I always talk about is that, kids and teens do much better in general and in their own therapy and healing when their parents are in therapy as well. So I think that's a really important aspect that you brought up.
Yeah, I think that is so true as well. And that's why one of the modalities I really love is internal family systems, where you're looking at the whole picture of what's going on, the whole snapshot, the kid and the whole environment, not just I'm bringing my child to you with these isolated problems. I think it's like, well, what's going on in the family structure is so important to explore and really plays a big role in what's happening in our own internal ecosystem as the person that's maybe showing up for therapy.
Oh, yes, exactly. I mean, I can't tell you how many times parents have brought in their kids and just basically said, they're acting out, fix them. And it's not just an issue with that child, it, like you said, it's the whole family structure. It's the whole system of the family. Something is going on. And I also really like that you brought up that, these different symptoms that you were having, it really is like a message from us that something is going on. And we have such a strong mind body connection. And I feel like a lot of people are disconnected from that, but we really have to listen to our minds and our bodies. They intertwine, they affect each other. What's going on in our lives affects, our whole environment and our mind, our thoughts, our symptoms, everything. And a lot of those mental health concerns and, just from growing up with these different issues or trauma or issues within the family, those do come out as physical symptoms a lot of the time.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Which is so interesting in my own situation. There's three girls and I'm in the middle. We all manifested it bodily in very, very different ways, but all of us had we've all had some sort of chronic health condition, which is just so fascinating to me that, yeah, when it's not moved through the body, it gets stored. I mean, there's, the body keeps a score book is well known in like the therapeutic community. It's somatically experienced, and we have to heal somatically as well. It's not just cognitive. It's so important that we really tap into where in our body it's being stored and help it move through specifically in that area.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And would you be willing to share some of the physical symptoms that you experienced with all of the things going on with your mental health and your relationship with your parents?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot. And what's interesting is aside from just the disordered eating behaviors, I really didn't notice a lot of these physical symptoms until my adulthood. And what really was a catalyst for me to explore even further was 3 months into being married and I became a stepmom. My health, like physical health, just completely crashed and I couldn't digest food. I had really severe chronic gut issues, a parasite, thyroid dysfunction. I had struggled with insomnia since I was a teen. So that was on board, extreme fatigue and exhaustion. And it was like all of a sudden, my physical health just completely collapsed. And while I did, have tests run and I worked with a functional medicine doctor to get my body back into balance, he was very clear at the onset of my treatment that this is a bigger issue than these physical symptoms. And I'm not just going to give you a supplement. I'm not going to just, give you an IV therapy and send you on your way. Like, because he works with traditional Chinese medicine, which very much is connected mind, body. Certain areas of your body are associated with certain emotions and stuck energy. And certain areas can indicate stuck emotions. And so, for instance, the thyroid is often linked to this not being able to speak your truth and to really be your honest self out in the world and to communicate that with others. And that was kind of one of the ways I learned to cope and adapt in my childhood environment, was to just please the people around me. And I was so attuned to trying to keep the peace. Part of that was being a middle child, like between my siblings, between my parents, and to the point where I just completely ignored my own body's needs and was very codependent in relationships and that sort of thing. So that was an example of how it very physically manifested in thyroid dysfunction, because I was suppressing my own voice and everybody else's mattered first and before my own. And eventually that catches up with you and the body says like, wait, we can't keep doing this. So
yeah, no, absolutely. It does catch up with you. And I think that's so common for kids too, especially when their parents are, people that fight a lot of the time. A lot of kids take on that responsibility and that shame, and they feel like it's their fault. And I think that's a really big thing that parents need to realize, that their relationship affects their children so much. And, their mental health, their feelings of stability, their feelings of love, their feelings of responsibility for their parents' relationship. So I think that's really important to bring up.
Yeah, I even actually remember my parents sitting down with me, specifically my dad, and saying, my relationship with your mom shouldn't affect like how you feel like about, your relationship with me. And I was like, but it does. Like, it's not disconnected. Like, it really does, because being three girls and like seeing the dynamic between them it's not just about them. It's affecting the entire family system, as we talked about. So I always thought that was really weird when either my parents would sit down and be like, try to let it not bother you. It's just between us. I'm like, really? Is it really? Like, it doesn't just affect you two, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people don't realize, kids are in school and they have their own friends and everything, especially, in those teenage years. But really, like for kids and teens, just their family is their whole world, especially for
Mhm.
little kids. And the way they feel about their parents, that unconditional love, and that's their whole universe is the family system. So of course it's going to affect children if you're fighting and yelling and have all this chaos in the home.
Absolutely.
So I know that you were in therapy from a young age, as you mentioned, but at what point did you really begin to realize that you needed to take your healing into your own hands? And what did that look like? What were the steps that you took to begin to heal?
When I was in therapy, it was not on my own volition. It was definitely, directed by my mom trying to do her best to make sure I got support. And we didn't actually even have a lot of access to resources at the time. Eating disorder help and treatment was really scarce in the area that I grew up in. And so, the first thing really was once I moved away from home, being able to identify without anyone telling me, oh, you need help, you need therapy, for me to decide, like, I want support. I want to get to the bottom of this for me, not just to make everyone think I'm okay or to get them off my back, sort of thing. Like I felt a little bit of that pressure as a teen. So being able to identify, I want support. I want to be well. Like I want to be able to function, as an adult in a healthy way and to flourish. And for my whole life, not to be about this. I think like realizing that I was made for more than just trying to figure out how to cope with my anxiety and my panic attacks. And it was affecting my work. I'd be driving to work. And I remember really vividly this scene where I was going around a roundabout and just like lost it in hysterics crying before I got to work. And I had no idea why. I had no idea. I called my sister before I went inside. I was like, I don't know what just happened to me. And I just realized this is not the way to live and it's not how I want to live. And I know I'm made for more. So I think that was also a really big catalyst for me to seek out more resources. And I've always been, as I have on my Instagram, a personal development nerd. I love to read. I love to absorb as much about all things psychology and healing and personal development. A lot of my healing came as a result of self study, really seeking out the resources and the tools for myself because I didn't really find one person ever who could give me anything, which I think is kind of a misnomer too. When we go on our healing journey, we're going to find some super enlightened guru, doctor person who's going to have all the answers to our problems. And the reality is the answers live inside you. And so all of those people, I really believe their role is to help you access the answers within you. And that's why I love what my functional medicine doctor really challenged me to do and to dig beneath the symptoms, is because he wasn't going to just give me surface level answers. He was like, you'll be back here in a couple months if you don't do your work. So I think that for me, realizing that and realizing like, oh, it's not some magical book or person that's going to finally help me feel better. It's realizing that I have the power within. First of all, your body alone has so much healing power to tap into. Literally, if you think about the emotional freedom technique and tapping, that's amazing that your body can do that all on its own with nobody else in the room, sort of thing. So, or even breath work is so powerful, and meditation, things that do not require another person to be there. Yes, like resource and get really good teachers on some of those things if you haven't been previously exposed to them, but then realize that it's ultimately up to you to do the steps and to take the healing actions that are going to make a difference.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned that it is within you. All those answers are within you. You can definitely have a guide and somebody that, either gives you advice or gives you a path to follow or some directives, but like you said, it really is within you. We all have this ability to heal and to grow. And I just want to ask too, so at the point that you moved out, were you still struggling with disordered eating at that time?
On and off, yes. It was kind of my default setting to, when things started to feel a little chaotic, to start controlling and getting more restrictive in those areas, until I really started to dig into the other resources that I had mentioned. That was kind of my only way I knew how to. It was actually a coping strategy, maladaptive, obviously dysfunctional, but it was kind of one of the only ones I had in my early adult years, until I was able to access more support.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's definitely a coping skill, like you said, not a healthy one, but a coping skill nonetheless. And were you somebody that struggled with body dysmorphia?
I didn't like to identify as someone who did, but I will say I definitely would have people tell me like how they saw me and how I saw myself was really, really different. I mean, who knows who was right and who was wrong? It's so weird. Sometimes it's so hard to see yourself accurately, anyways. But yeah, I definitely think that there was some of that on board and just a lot of body shame in general. Maybe not even dysmorphia, but I had a lot of shame around being a woman. And ironically, my eating disorder really started at a time, a critical time in development where I was becoming a woman. All these changes were happening in my body, and sexuality and expressing that was a very taboo topic in my community growing up. I think, in another sense, the eating disorder served as a way to make me more masculine. So I really didn't have to explore any of that because it felt really scary and really shameful to be a woman. Yeah, I think that was another layer. I think it was actually a lot more shame and coming to terms with, I mean, because my period stopped for years and years and years due to being malnourished. And so realizing that some of the things that were going to come with being a healthy person was going to be things I was actually really afraid of. And so I think there was some hurdles there too, to that. Oh my goodness, even just being, I'm pregnant with my first baby and 8 months now pregnant has been such a world of healing for how I see my body and such a huge player in helping me release a lot of body shame. So it's been really interesting because I heard the opposite, that if you have disordered eating past pregnancy can be really triggering. It's like, no, it's been so healing for me. So
Well, that's really good to hear because I've heard the same thing, that
yeah.
being pregnant could be really triggering. And congratulations, by the way. That's so exciting.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's really great. Yeah, no, I like that you mentioned that because I think a lot of people that have had eating disorders or disordered eating get very fearful about becoming pregnant because I've heard the same thing. So that's so good to hear, and I'm glad that you're sharing that. As you mentioned, with getting older and going through that puberty and maturing and becoming a woman, that is such a scary time for teenagers. I remember one day myself looking in the mirror, and I have endometriosis. So I've been on birth
Mm,
control from a very young age. I think I went on birth control when I was 14. And, birth control, I gained so much weight and, my breasts got much larger and I just had all these side effects from the birth control. And I remember looking in the mirror one day when I got out of the shower and my breasts were so much bigger and I started crying because I didn't recognize my body anymore. So
mhm.
it's such a hard time for girls becoming women. And I think it's something we need to talk about more because your body's changing, your mind is changing, you're growing hair in all these different places, you're bleeding from your private areas. It's such a
Yeah.
scary time. And we don't really talk about that.
Yeah. And I think even if maybe it's not the parents' intention for this to be the message, I think the lack of conversation and normalization around it to me was transferred as it's because it's shameful. Like it's like we don't talk about it because it's embarrassing, sort of thing. And so that's why I internalized it as that. I can understand for parents, maybe sometimes it's awkward to have these conversations, but almost not talking about it can make you feel like something's wrong. If people aren't willing to talk about it, there must be a reason. Maybe it's because it's wrong.
Right. And then I remember when I first got my period when I was 13, everybody was saying, women, family members, my friends, and whoever knew about it was like, oh, congratulations, congratulations. And I remember thinking and saying, what are you talking about? This is horrible. Why would you be saying congratulations? I was like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened.
That is so funny. Yeah. One of the books I love, I don't know if you know of Elisa Vitti. I think that's how you say her name, where she has the book Living in the Flow and Women Code. Her stuff on period is so empowering for women. And if I have a girl someday, that's definitely how I want to approach it, because I think, first of all, to be empowered, you've got to have knowledge, I believe. And so to really understand what's happening and how to optimize your menstrual cycle so that it's not a miserable experience, because it actually doesn't have to be. It's kind of this misnomer by culture that it has to be this awful, painful experience. And there's ways to really like to build your life out in a way that supports you in each phase so that you feel your very best and really honor the energetic shifts that happen. That kind of stuff would have been so empowering for me, I know, as a teen as well. And so I don't know, I think it starts with just education and empowerment, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I have not heard of her or those books, so I will definitely check that out for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
And so as for, your relationship with food now and healthy coping skills that you have now and self-regulation techniques that work for you, can you share some of those things?
I mean, some of my favorite, and part of when I had my chronic like physical health decline about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, one of the things that I really tapped into right away was just being connected to the earth. It sounds so simple. One of my healing strategies was to be on the ground as much as possible. So, like every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I'd go eat outside, like in the dirt. And it sounds so silly, but it was incredibly grounding, for lack of a better word, and just balancing for my whole system. And of course, we now know that being connected to the earth actually does physically change your body in a positive way and can help reduce inflammation and all these other things. So it is really powerful. I also have had really significant breakthroughs with tapping, emotional freedom technique, and the tapping solution by Nick Ortner is a really good book to start with in regards to just, everyday person who's never heard of it. He gives you really simple ways to get started. And that one is amazing because I have seen it to work and move emotions through my body that honestly, I think would have taken probably like 6 months of counseling. Like a specific instance, there was one physical health trauma specifically that I had last August. And I was so overwhelmed by like a sense of grief because I had to have like an organ removed from my body. And I felt like hollow and empty and just completely lost. I did tapping not that long after the surgery on that specific topic. And it was so crazy how energetically it just like completely lifted and like flew away. And I could not access those same emotions again, the heavy emotions towards that experience. They were like completely gone. It was so crazy. So I've definitely seen tapping work really powerfully in my own life. And I'm not saying it's a magic cure and pill for all things at all, but it's definitely worth a try because it's really not that difficult to get started with. I also implemented a regular yoga practice, which was new for me because by nature, I'm just an intense go, go, go driver kind of person. And so my philosophy on working out was like, if you're not miserable by the end of it and exhausted, that wasn't a workout. Honestly, a big part of my healing with my body was realizing that however you express, movement of your body should be an act of love and listening. And you don't just push your body through things if it's saying no, just to check off that you got your workout in. And so, anyways, that for me felt really rebellious to choose to do yoga first thing every morning instead of like an intense HIIT workout. Because honestly, it felt way better to do yoga every morning instead. And so that has been a practice I've now done for, I don't know, maybe 4 years regularly. And it's just the sweetest, most gentle way to start my day. I really, really enjoy that. So those are just a few of the things that have been really helpful for me.
I love all of those. Thank you so much for sharing those. And I don't think it's weird at all that you would eat outside in the dirt because, like you said, nature really is so healing for us. So I love that you shared that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask, and you don't have to answer if this is too personal, but how is your relationship with your parents now? Did you ever talk about your upbringing and the issues that it caused you? Was there any healing with that or any conversations?
Yeah, that's still a work in progress. Ironically, once all three of us girls were grown up and my little sister, it was like a month after she got married, they finally split up, which I mean, all of us siblings were like, what a relief. This is, this would have been better like so much earlier on for everybody. But that in and of itself definitely opened up a kind of a whole new layer because it's just so different. If you experience divorce as an adult, I actually think there's not enough resources for adult children who experience it because, it's like you're an adult, you should be fine, sort of thing. But it was really, really challenging. And so that was, I want to say maybe 5 years ago that happened now. It's definitely changed the dynamics between myself and each parent individually. But I think it's been a process. And one that's hard sometimes to unravel because it's just tough balance if you don't want to be in any way blaming your parents. And like in my situation, I know they both loved me, but your parents can only parent, as far as they've gone in their own healing. And so I just know, and I'm able to see now that there's a lot of unresolved trauma in both of them. And they didn't have the regulation tools and skills either. So how could they have passed them down to us? And so one of the things that I've dove into a lot more recently is just attachment theory and understanding how some of that plays a part and why I have difficulty connecting with either of my parents in certain ways, and how that really takes shape from a really young age. And, if your parents never experienced secure attachment and what that looks like to offer that, it's going to be hard for them to cultivate that in their home. And so I think just being able, I was listening, I don't know if you know Mark Grove's podcast. He's a relationship expert and guru, but he talks about how for him it was really healing in his relationship with his parents when he finally saw them as people and not just as parents, but as like regular people who were once kids themselves. And I think like it sounds so simple, but it's true. As I've processed becoming a mother myself, and I'm like, on the cusp of entering that world, I realize even in pregnancy, like I am doing the best that I can with how far I've come so far in my own development and consciousness. And that's the best I can offer my child. Like, and you do feel like you kind of have no clue what to do. And like, I don't know, inadequate. And so I don't know exactly how my parents felt with us raising us, but I have more compassion for them, I think now than I did kind of in my early adulthood, where I was just really mad, like just really like, how could you do, not work on your relationship and give us like, at least try harder to make it more peaceful for me and my sisters and all of that. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it absolutely does. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you brought up a really good point that, we don't really talk about parents getting divorced or separating when, you're an adult, and how difficult that can be. And like you said, people would expect, well, you're an adult, you don't even live with them anymore, who cares? But it really is, a big deal. It is a big change still to the family system. And one of my friends also, their parents got not divorced, but separated just a few years ago. And, it was a really big deal for her. Yeah, that's something I think that we don't really talk about enough as well. And, it's kind of like, oh, well, you're an adult, who cares? Let your parents do what they're going to do. But it does affect you and your family system. And just thinking about, traditions and holidays, and maybe, you don't live at home, so you didn't know it was going to happen. Maybe it was a big shock or didn't expect it. And that's just, kind of rocks your whole world. And like you said, your view of your parents as being real people with relationship issues.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So, well, thank you so much for being here, Erika. I think this was so incredibly helpful, and you shared so many tips, and I loved hearing your story and so many strategies. Is there any final words you want to say to our listeners, or anything we didn't mention?
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed diving into all of this with you, and hope that it's helpful, that there's at least some nugget that people are able to draw out that are listening and help them on their journey. I think the biggest thing is, for me, that was super healing, is when I came to realize that my body was not my enemy. And I could stop blaming my body for not working right and having all these supposed problems. And in order to heal, I could actually work with my body and listen to it, and that was safe to do that. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's the disordered eating, that you get this very separated, disconnected sense of like, I am me, and then I have my body here who's breaking down and not following the directions that, I'm giving it. And it can be really hard to navigate that. And I think when I saw my body as an enemy, instead of realizing, oh, it's actually a partner in my healing, and the reason why it's talking to me via all these symptoms is because it wants me to see what's underneath so I can actually heal and move on. And like, there's actually life beyond all the symptoms if I'm willing to listen to my body. And it's really hard to access that if you are just shoving aside the messages, or just kind of writing them off as like, oh, my body's just doesn't work right, and this is just going to be my life forever. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think this is all going to be so helpful for our listeners. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. And can you tell everybody where to find you and tell them about your podcast?
Yeah, so you can find me at www.worthwellness.org, and I do offer body partnership coaching. There's a couple offerings up there. And then I have my podcast, which is the Worth Wellness Podcast. And I'm also recording a lot more on YouTube actually now. I've switched over to video for whatever reason. I actually find it easier now than the podcast. But for the time being, I'm interviewing guest experts on all things health, wellness, and health reclamation. So that's a fun place to check out. And then on Instagram, I'm at Worth Wellness by Erika.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Everyone, go check out Erika. All her links will be in the show notes. So, Erika, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Erika, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. And I think my listeners are going to learn so much from you. Again, everyone, go check out Erika. Her links are in the show notes. And please share this episode, tag me on social media. And if you haven't yet, please, please, please go leave me a review or rate it on Spotify. It really helps get the word out about my podcast and can help other people. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you have a really great week, and I will talk to you next week. Same time, same place.